It's April 22nd, 2026, and I am doing a live weekly update. And it's interesting to do it now because I've spent a lot of time in front of videos lately, cameras, recording live videos, and audiences. So for this week's live weekly update, I'm actually going to talk about truly the process itself. I titled this one when I was scheduling it about flirting with the abyss and the leap into faith. And that is going to be a little bit of a build off of what's happened since last Friday, which was the first For the Love of Strangers of the year on Getting Free. And also some surprises have happened in the middle of that, like 420, which is a great day on the calendar. But I celebrated in a particularly new and special way. So I want to talk about that. But moreover, I want to use today's update to kind of peel back the layers and actually do what feels maybe more like a director's cut or something of the work that's been in progress, because I'm putting a lot out right now and creating a lot. I'm at super max capacity in terms of my outputs at this moment. But what has happened in the past 4 weeks of doing it has been its own really remarkable process. And I think that's a good reason to have these kinds of updates, So this live weekly update, Flirting with the Abyss, the leap into faith, think of it as a director's cut of the behind the scenes explanation and commentary and kind of what's been going on and what's been happening. And I also love that way back when, I don't even know, years ago, when I had this idea of doing I talked about it a couple weeks ago, my Love an Artist, which was going to be this metafiction newsletter about an artist who was putting out newsletters to describe their work and their projects and their performances, and then what the audiences did in light of that, and what the kind of the artist statement behind the piece, and then what they learned and how it went, and then people's reactions to it. Basically, that's what this is now. We're just doing it in real life. Instead of it being a fictional newsletter about some artist, this is actually just a live update based on what I've been doing. And so, hey, Love an Artist. The fact that everything I do is so meta is getting more intense, that I'm even having a hard time processing it. But I told somebody recently, it was the thing about being as meta as you possibly can is that you cannot fail. I've said it before, but this is the biggest life hack ever. Even last night, I went to bed. No, I'm already off track. Last night, I had a hard time getting to sleep because my brain was going too much. And so at 2 a.m., I was I just want to sleep. But I've learned that if the channeling is happening that clearly, then write it down or do something with it. So at 2 a.m., I succumbed to the thought compulsions and reached over, got my notebook, and I wrote this little thing about an insomniac philosopher. It's right here. It says, new idea, because I'm tracking my new ideas as they pop up. New idea, truth is meta. And that needs a little bit of working out, let's say. But honestly, the way I was maybe this is a way to get out of the chaos and the confusion and the distortions that are so pervasive and probably will continue to get worse. But if we think about truth being meta, it's almost like how to throw yourself a life raft to get out of the mess. What I mean by that is that if there is something happening and you don't know, is this cup real? Is my lucky cat cup real? I hate it when we do material thought experiments like this. Just point to the chair or the table, whatever. Is my lucky cat cup real? I don't know. We can get into the basis of all the talks of perception and truth and reality, but at least we could go meta on it and be what I do know is that right now I'm processing this, and the fact that I'm talking to you about this is happening. That's such not an inspirational example, but I was like, if we get lost, we can always go meta. And I feel like there's like this little layer of like salvation that happens in being meta enough that we can be like, I don't know what you thought happened or what was going on here, but this is for sure happening right now. Um, Again, it needs work. But anyway, my point is that my meta has gotten so intense lately that even I'm a little bit astounded by it, but it's really given me a lot of confidence. So maybe it's not just a matter of like truth, but like how do you get to the abyss and the leap into faith? There's so much to share here. So I'm just going to kind of roll with it. I have a lot of things I want to talk about, my little lessons and insights and learning. And let me find my page that I was at. Last week I was working with some kids. I'm doing this program right now, and one of the kids asked, he was like, what does so meta mean? Because apparently his teacher had said it, and so we were talking about what I mean by so meta. The other interesting thing that happened, and I've been thinking about this since, I talk about moments that matter and these kind of like little conversations or exchanges that like have sticking power, or maybe even just like serendipity and there's like interesting timing, but it's one of those little like pings that kind of illuminates whatever is going on in your like own personal landscape. That happened this weekend too, because I also just, sort of intuitively found myself floating through our downtown area and ended up running into some people who I had crossed paths with recently. This one person's husband, who I didn't know, we were talking, and he was really curious about what I'm up to. And so I was describing some of the projects, like For the Love of Strangers and The Gadfly. And I said something about being a meta-philosophical performance artist, and he was like, meta? What do you mean by meta? And it was really interesting because now that was the second question in a week from a person who was very like in it and invested in the conversation. Like we're following each other, but to me, that's a note of like, maybe I should talk about what meta means to me, just to clarify once more. So when I think about meta, what I'm talking about in terms of, it goes deeper than the thinking about thinking or writing about writing. To me, I like to push it a little bit further in the like being explicit about what I mean, and like the doing is happening of the thing that we're talking about, or the thing that we're exploring is actually what we're also practicing and embodying in the moment. That tracks if it's like we're writing about writing because we're writing, or we're thinking about thinking because we're doing the thing we're thinking. But in terms of meta-philosophical performance art, if the philosophy, for instance, is a concept that we're exploring is like vulnerability, then to really be taking it up a level, we would be vulnerable in the exploration of vulnerability, so that we're not only discussing it with like, our guard up, but actually by being vulnerable, that is a way to more fully understand let's just keep going with it, the philosophical significance or implications of vulnerability. When I think about For the Love of Strangers, I always say everything's meta if you want it to be. And For the Love of Strangers, for instance, is like another one of my little experience containers where I'm giving some of my best worst ideas, but often those are my best worst ideas for meaningfully connecting with others. And the way that the whole thing is set up is that then people start talking with like small groups about those ideas, and lo and behold, they are now more meaningfully connecting, because it's not just like an awkward conversation with strangers that stays really superficial, but like actually gets more into like the depth of what is it about this idea of connecting with people in this particular way that lands funny for me or is actually really exciting, and I would totally do that, or I have a similar experience and now people are sharing. So when I say meta, I mean we're doing the thing that we're talking about, which is always a great way for practicing the philosophy. If we think about, when I say I'm a philosopher, it's not so much because of my degree, and like I'm always living and learning so much more into what it means for me to be a philosopher, especially if I say I'm a meta-philosophical performance artist. Like that's a new being to live into. But it always is a helpful recognition for me to go into the practice of that. So it's not just something that like you have because of a title or a degree or, something external. It's actually, you are that thing by the practice of it. So I'm in this stage right now where something has shifted in my brain. And like, as I remember in 2020, it was one of my more recent ahas, October 2020, when I was having like kind of a hard time. And Sean, I see that you're here. Hi. I'm even thinking about a conversation. I'm sure we had it. I know that there's documentation of us having this conversation that followed, but I was like, October 2020, oh my gosh, huge revelation. I'm a philosopher. And there were times over the years, so many times, when I have to like stumble upon that again for myself. I have now, in the past 5 or so years since then, really like accepted the fact that I'm a philosopher. This sounds so silly, but I really have like accepted that I am a philosopher. I don't know what I needed to break through with that. I'm sure there's all sorts of shit of like baggage from the academy, from graduate school, from not really being situated within the discipline of philosophy in terms of research and scholarship. I'm not a tenured faculty member. I don't even have a teaching appointment any longer within a university. So, like, I'm not in the academy. Maybe there's some notion of like, you're not a philosopher unless. But ironically, when I left my ties with even higher education in 2021, by then I was like really pretty solid in the fact that I am a philosopher. So what's been exciting since then is that in 2022, I think that was when I like really first uttered the phrasing of being a meta philosophical performance artist. It was a vision that I had. I was trying to remember last night, like, when did I first come up with that? Because I know the metafiction newsletter about Love and Artist was years before that too. Even everything I've been talking about, like, yeah, the metafiction novel that I joked about talking about, that was like 2016, 17, maybe even. So I'm trying to trace where meta philosophical performance artist came into like my way of speaking and like identifying myself. But it's really only been in the past couple of years that I've been able to now like fully throw myself into that too. So I hope that what you're following here is that like there's been this really interesting developmental process of me even being able to like get comfortable with claiming the practices that I actually am living and doing, and especially in the ways that those come through in the projects that I'm pursuing, or like the creative energy that I'm putting out. So, wow, all of that is to say, yeah, I guess now I'm in my season of like really leaning into being a metaphilosophical performance artist. And that, at this particular moment on April 22nd, 2026, feels really salient because I am like right at the precipice of the abyss again. So I talk about the abyss a lot, and I want to unpack that a little bit more too. I brought it up at For the Love of Strangers again. Last Friday was the first For the Love of Strangers of the year, and I tweaked it a little bit. I want to share more about kind of why I'm tweaking my spaces and the ways that I'm like experimenting with how to do that. But for the Love of Strangers, I was like, I want to go a little bit more hard in the philosophy. This is less zany, weird, quirky, funny stories about meaningfully connecting. And I wanted to just talk about some of my best, worst ideas on the theme of getting free. So my best, worst ideas for getting free. And let that be the prompt to encourage people to connect with each other. And it went well. Like, I got really great feedback on it. Personally, I felt really good in it too. Which is always another interesting kind of data point to collect of like, how did it feel when I was in that space? And I felt really good leading the container for the Love of Strangers on getting free, which is funny because it was, the first time in a while of doing that, and with a different emphasis on philosophy rather than my weird, eclectic, offbeat stories. So we talked about the abyss. And the other beautiful thing about this process, like if you're trying to understand how I'm doing what I'm doing, basically I've ended up also scaffolding in other spaces for me to be in the process of processing it. I know that I'm constantly thinking, like, especially in the past week, my process has been like overwhelming. The internal, personal, like private process has been a lot. I'm like 12-hour days minimum into late nights, definitely. Like it's been so intense. But in addition to that, I have spaces where I'm actually processing with people too. So For the Love of Strangers is one input to kind of like, generate some stimulation, some ideas, some interactions. But the other space, oh, hi. The other space is the Sunday space that I'm doing right now, which is Romancing the Revolution. So Romancing the Revolution is also, this is a digital virtual container every Sunday for about an hour. And I've talked about it because I finally made these pages, right, that I've been talking about for so long of making my pages. Oh, let me do that. In March, I shared the Abyss page, which is one of my favorite pages I've ever made. I know I've talked about it a lot too, but just since it's on theme, we'll just keep it out, for company for today. But in Romancing the Revolution, we were talking a little bit about Friday's talk on the Abyss and vulnerability, because if you've been tracking the past few weeks, vulnerability has been the theme for me. It's not brand new. I mean, this has come up especially in the past couple of years as I've been creating these public spaces. For the Love of Strangers, the Gadfly, Liberation is Local, now Romancing the Revolution. Now I'm doing these live weekly updates. So I'm streaming, and I've also pushed myself to share more on social media, which I don't love. I mean, I basically stopped doing social media in a personal kind of way back in 2016. So trying to get back into a cadence of me sharing what I'm doing is also just one more tier on this, I don't know, structure of how I'm trying to build in opportunities for me to practice and connect and share and then process and engage in my own oh, that happened, what I want to make of that, and then keep turning it out. So in Romancing the Revolution, we've been talking about vulnerability a lot, and this is kind of like a through line. I know I'm all over the place right now, so I hope you're just loosely holding multiple threads. But if you've been paying attention to the live weekly updates and even just my posts and stuff that's been going on in the past month, there's a time stamp on this. Vulnerability has been the sort of foothold of my thinking and my growth and my therapeutic work and my own personal reflections pretty intensely. More so than what has come up in the past couple of years as I've been more publicly engaging. The reason why I'm making that differentiation is because so many people over the years have said, oh, recently, you're so vulnerable, and people really appreciate the vulnerability. I think that is what people would say they're connecting with it For the Love of Strangers, is that I'm sharing parts of myself. Even at the last Gadfly, a stranger basically interrupted me. It was raised his hand and said, you've put so much thought into all of this, to get up here and talk in front of us and be so vulnerable. Why blah, 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 blah. And I was that's so intriguing that we just barely got started. And he already has clocked that this is vulnerable for me to get up in front of people and create a space and share. The irony there, just for funsies to tell you, was that I was planning on being vulnerable in that Gadfly experience. I think I've mentioned this before. But I hadn't even gotten to the teaser gotcha vulnerability story when I was people are going to think this is really vulnerable when I tell them this thing. But what I really was going to do was push and tell the most vulnerable thing. So I did do that. And I know I've been kind of giving you a little bit of a tracking of some of these things. But again, immediately the timeline is that in the past month, vulnerability has been the key of my reflections. What's cool about that is that I can also see that since I've sort of taken vulnerability on in this very intentional way, rooted in, really inspired by a particular passage from Audre Lorde, no surprises there, which I read a couple of weeks ago, that was inspired. The passage itself was centered in the program that I'm doing with these kids. So it's because I'm engaging with other people that then I was let me share this passage. Now we're reading this Audre Lorde passage, and she's talking about having to address the most vulnerable parts of herself so as to not have her enemies have anything over her any longer. And then that experience, which was literally 4 weeks ago today, has been so like life changing that I like I can see the way that this is already translated differently in my own life and the way of showing up. I hope this isn't being too vague and too abstract. But in that little like short version of the story, like it came up as a concept in a conversation, and then I was like, wow, thanks Audrey Lord and thanks to these students for talking about this. Now I'm reflecting and like really looking at myself pretty closely of what I'm not willing to do. And then I set myself off on this like wild, just expedited trajectory that has now since like gone in a totally different direction of like my own, not my own relationship to vulnerability, but the way that I am actually showing up. And this has been like one of the major things in the conversation, again, that we've been talking about in Romancing the Revolution. And then that leads me all the way up to like the edge of the abyss again, where I am right now. Do you see how complicated this is? There's so much always happening. So all of what I just said is like this long, intricate, very like multifaceted web of existence that I've been in for the past few weeks. We're going to end up here at the abyss again. And I want to talk about like what it means to face the abyss from this place and how I'm thinking about that differently than what it might sound like. But just to tell you a little bit more about like what I've noticed in myself around vulnerability, I think let me go back to the way that feels in my body. When I had the thought about a month ago to do the gadfly in a different way, the story of how this really unfolded was that like the night before, I had a talk with myself in my head and it was like, if you want to be a metaphilosophical performance artist, then you really have to do it. And if you want to talk about vulnerability, then you really have to be vulnerable. And because I had been prompted and confronted by this like very nagging insight of my own reticence and resistance around a certain kind of vulnerability, that was me being like, okay, do it. So I went into that gadfly with a sudden shift in plans to really demonstrate the vulnerability. Again, it did not go well. If you didn't know, spoiler alert, it didn't go great that time. It was because of the crowd, it was because of a lot of other things. But the funny thing about the way I felt in my body was that before I even walked into that building, I was sitting on a bench outside and I was like, this is going to be fine if I feel good doing it. And I can feel good doing it because I can just be at ease and comfortable and have fun. And if I'm in that space, if that's my energy, then like, you know, nothing can really go wrong here. It's not that big of a deal. And what matters most is like how I show up to kind of set the tone. That energy that I walked in with, like fully intended to have an easy breezy, super fun, chill time and just like roll with it, immediately disrupted. And my energy was bad. So I was thrown by the lack of people showing up. And then when people did show up, I was like, oh, this feels very uncomfortable now too. The space was weird. The tech was weird. Like pretty much all of the conditions, internal and external, were off. And so I was not in a place of having like easy breezy fun time. And I will say that I'm sure that had a lot to do with it too. The overall like experience of everything. But now it was like, did I have to go through that to feel something important and shift? I don't know. But one thing that happened, oh no, I'm not going to tell you that. I met my second most recent troll that night. This man whose like voice is in my head now for weeks. And as much as I hate a troll, you know, sometimes it's just the mirror that's the provocation to say, oh, you've got this little tender spot here that you still need to work on. So, well, since I'm doing it, I might as well. Look, just jump in, lean into it, be vulnerable. The thing that a man said that night that really bothered me was that he wasn't planning on staying. They didn't even know what was going on in the space that night. And then when they found out, they're like, oh, we'll probably just like be here for a minute and then leave. So they didn't join the group and they stayed at the bar, but they didn't leave for like the majority of the time. And instead, in that time, were very interruptive and disruptive. And it didn't feel like a very respectful or kind energy, a little bit more like antagonistic and condescending. So, anyway, to demonstrate that point, at one point, he was like, I was like, do you want to, come be a part of all of this? He was like, no, no, no. But apparently you have something to say. So let's hear it. And that may not sound as like antagonistic or condescending as I think it felt after the fact, but it bothered me when he said it because I immediately felt in myself be like, oh, do I have something to say? Like what I was planning on saying that night, remember, was like the most vulnerable thing. Maybe there was some subconscious like protector coming up at me, be like, don't do the most vulnerable thing in front of these people. They don't deserve it. Or it's not safe. But something in me like heard what he said. Well, apparently you have something to say. And it maybe he didn't even say it that way, but that's how it sounded. Like, apparently you have something to say. Like, I'm trying to accentuate this so you can kind of get the tone that it landed in me. And it has bothered me because I'm like, well, what do I have to say? Hold that thought, because we're going to get to the abyss at the end of this. It might take us a while. So anyway, that's been my second troll voice. And so I've been like thinking about that a lot. But in the meantime, let me get back on the vulnerability train. So I've been noticing the way that I've been showing up because I talked about my biggest vulnerability then after sharing it in Romancing the Revolution with one person, after talking about it in therapy, and then I talked about it on the live stream, and I was like, here's the most vulnerable thing. It's what this other troll said to me back 15 something years ago, maybe. I don't even know who they are. It was a comment on a YouTube video. And so the vulnerability there, maybe these trolls are cousins. Because the vulnerability of the original troll that was provoked was that voice made me think I had nothing to share that was worthwhile, or that if I thought I had something to share, that would be very self-absorbed and self-centered of me, to think that I had anything like interesting or worthwhile to share with anybody. So it kept me really held back for a really long time. I can hear that now that I'm saying it. Those two troll voices are definitely related. So fascinatingly, what has happened since naming that with, close friends, close participants in spaces, publicly in front of strangers that do not feel safe, on the internet, and then that was all within 1 week. Now we're, add a couple more weeks stacked onto that, and what has happened? Let's go to this week, 420. Most of my good ideas do happen through a lot of supportive inspiration from plants. And I'm not high all the time, but I do engage in like part of my process of thinking and feeling through the help of cannabis. So on 420, it wasn't the day, but there had been days leading up to this where I was like getting these ideas and having so many serendipities. Excuse me, Sean, I know you love serendipities. And let me tell you that after Fridays for the Love of Strangers, that day was popping off. That night I went home and like mind blown over how many serendipities in like a tiny, tiny, tiny slice of like an hour. And I was like, wow, could not have asked for a clearer sign that like something is happening right now that's important. So that sort of was like my alarm to like really pay attention. And then the couple of days after that, Saturday, Sunday, really started generating like very important ideas. So I've been taking walks, I've been in my process, I've been writing, I've been thinking, I've been doing what I do to come up with my ideas. And I had all these ideas that I've been working on, and I've been getting very excited about it. And when I say ideas, that sounds like too plural, because I'm trying to focus on one major project. And I will say, call it my biggest, most ambitious project of my life so far. No pressure. But what I'm trying to think about is like, I really want to get serious about doing the one thing that is the most important thing for me to do. Maybe I'm kind of like echoing my own troll voice. Like, what do I have to say? Not have, like just possess, because I've got a lot in me that I could share. but the have as like an imperative to share? That has been a question that's really been weighing heavy on me for like decades, but especially I've been like sitting with it for the past few days. And so I'm like, okay, if this is the idea and these are the things that I have to share, how can I commit to that? I really want to do it. And that, like, opening the door to that commitment is what brought in all these other new kind of like inspired ideas. So back to the vulnerability piece on 2020. This had been a couple of days going on where I was like really sitting with like all these little very like energized connections sort of coming together and swirling, if this is what it looks like in my brain. All these things just kind of zooming around and like finding their little connected parts. That was already underway. But then 420 happened, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to work on this project. And now I have this idea of being, if I'm a metaphilosophical performance artist, then let's fucking go. Let's do it. So in my high mind, I was like, what if I just made a video and invited people to be a part of this process? And I was scared to do it. So I tempered the process itself by doing a video with no live audience. Sat on that for like a hot minute and then put that video on social media. And I said, if this gets 10 likes before I change my mind, maybe I'll do a live stream and actually share this process. So it was kind of like a test and a little ask for some sort of external validation. Let me tell you what really happened with the need for external validation, because this is part of the process that I've been going through and I really enjoyed it. So within a few minutes, some people started liking it. And remember, I set the threshold at 10 before I changed my mind. It's like a little bit of a bet. Double dog dare myself and want other people to dare me to do it too. So I got up to 8 likes and I was like, oh, this is probably going to happen. I think I'm going to do it. And there's a way of like gauging in your own self. Like, do I want to do it? Yeah. Ultimately, I think I did want to do it, but I wasn't sure because I was still asking like for permission from other people. The 9th person to like that post was my best friend. And as soon as she did that, I was like, cool. That's what I needed. Because if there's anybody here who I will love and trust, it's my best friend, And so in my mind, I was like, that like carries the weight of 10 likes automatically if my best friend likes it. And there's a very specific reason in particular why her vote of confidence meant so much to me. Now, time warp. Whew. Back to 2022. When I wrote or transcribed my copy of Learning Healing. This was a really fun, like, couple week creative project where I was just like, I got on a whim, went and found my notebook that I'd been working on. I was like, what if I just like wrote some of these things out and put it out there, Learning Healing. So that's like the closest transcription to like journal entries that I've ever done. And when I published that, my friend and I had a conversation and she like responded in another way too, like text or a voice message or something. But she responded to one particular line in Learning Healing and straight from my journals, remember that then I transcribed and I shared. And she said like, my line was like, or maybe I just do like get even weirder. I'm summarizing, but it was like, if I do even weirder things, maybe that's my next move. And so she was like, I can't wait for you to do weirder things. So 2022, oh my God, 4 years later, I've been doing weirder things for sure, in the sense of creating places and spaces and containers for engaging. Literally For the Love of Strangers is like so funny because it is a container to talk about the tens and nearly hundreds of ideas that I've had that are weird ideas. So itself is a meta weird idea, right? But when my best friend on 420 gave the like, when I was like, should I do this thing? Like I also don't ever share or post anything if I'm like under any kind of influence. I've learned hard lessons by just talking to people in my own home when I'm stoned, and that doesn't go well. So I'm for sure not going to do this like publicly on the internet. But I broke that rule on 420 and, did my little teaser pilot test. Like, what if I were to do a video? Like it if you want to see me live stream. And then I did live stream. So because my best friend liked it, because she back in 2022 said like, yeah, I want to see you do like the weirder thing. Can't wait. And then, oh, I forgot the key part. I didn't wait for the 10th like at that point any longer. Yes, my friends' support meant a lot to me and like was weighted more heavily than just like somebody else who maybe is a follower that I'm not very close to. But I decided that this was a really good moment for me to be my 10th like, for me to be the one to decide it, where so that it's not all external like permissions. But I was like, that's, if I'm really going to do this, then it has to also come from me. So I counted myself as the 10th like, and I didn't wait to see if other people liked it, and I didn't like check it again. I just went straight to the live stream and started doing it. I put it on Substack because that's where I'm live streaming. So maybe people thought I was going to do it on Instagram and they would be able to watch. They didn't, but a couple of people did show up. I ended up doing this live stream for 2 hours. It was so wild and intense, and actually like a capturing of me so raw in my process that what I thought I was going to be doing was working on a proposal, like trying to write up a proposal to pitch to someone I specifically have in mind about this big project I want to pursue. And I ended up not even really working on the proposal, because what ensued instead was this 2 hour long, like me thinking all these like philosophical threads and components were just like colliding. I don't even know how else to describe it. But when I'm talking about like noting my new ideas, I was like having new ideas just in chain reactions to one another. So what actually ended up happening then was that I was like stoned on a live having epiphanies and aha moments for 2 hours with a witness, at least one, if not more. And it was really fun. It was really great. But talk about vulnerability, because like I've never done anything like that ever before. And maybe there's a reason why we don't show like the behind the scenes process, or maybe there's something very special about keeping that private. I'm not sure. But I thought that this was an opportunity for me to just try it and see. I think particularly because of the past few weeks of me really like just like walking into the vulnerable spaces in my own process. From sharing, here's my vulnerability, to then like doing the thing and just going for it. So if you've heard me talk about this before, I've said for years that like I don't know why people say I'm so vulnerable when it doesn't feel like I'm doing vulnerable things, but I think my like lens has gotten a little bit sharper on that, especially over the past few weeks. So I can appreciate now where I am doing something more vulnerable, namely by tracking where I have the choice, the moment of choice, like to do or not, to share or not, to be like more honest or not. And I don't have better language to describe like the what I guess is what people are picking up on as vulnerable in that kind of space. But I for sure can feel it, because I know that the 420, like even the decision to record myself propositioning a potential live stream, then the decision to post it with an ask of like support, then the decision to just do it. Those are three little steps that I can very readily identify as like leaning into the vulnerability to the point of doing it. And then what happened was like very fun and very generative, extremely. And I stopped it at 2 hours because that's a lot anyway. But I ended up working for another 3 after that too. So just as another kind of like glimpse into the way of my kind of where my energy is at and how like high it is right now. No pun intended. I'm not high. But yeah, that was 5 hours after many other days already, or many other hours already in the day of working. So yeah, big Monday of the week. So let's talk about this thing about vulnerability then, because in terms of flirting with the abyss and the leap into faith, this is where all of this is kind of culminating and leading to. On Fridays for the Love of Strangers, the theme was on getting free. And I started that out. I actually really loved this format in particular. One of the things I learned from this last For the Love of Strangers, by shifting to a more philosophically grounded experience instead of just like kind of quirky, weird ideas under a theme, actually having the philosophical theme and then some of my best first ideas, and that might sound very similar. I don't know. Somehow it felt different for me. Anyway, I structured it by like kind of saying like, you got to free your mind first. And if you actually change the way that you think or what you learn, the real proof of that being significant is what you do after that. Like, how does it change you? So it leans into this ask or this question about action and how you do things differently. But sometimes it feels hard to do things differently. So I made space for us to actually talk about like our nervous systems and our bodies and what we feel like when we are trying to stretch beyond ourselves. That harks back to ascesis. It goes back to like my excellently embodied birthday party that I've talked about, and so many other ways of trying to push the embodied experience of what it means to overcome ourselves, like through literally not a thought, but actually the doing. And often I think that's what people say is like the discomfort, like it can be painful when we're building muscle or to like become more flexible. You have to stretch your muscles, and sometimes the stretching isn't really a good feeling. So this way of like getting beyond oneself or self-overcoming can feel uncomfortable. But I don't think that that's always true. This is kind of a core tenet of my thoughts too, that to get beyond ourselves, the ascesis, the overcoming, it doesn't have to always feel difficult, harsh, uncomfortable, strenuous, or unpleasant. Sometimes that ascesis, that self-overcoming, the practice or the disciplined like training that we might do to overcome ourselves can actually also feel really good. So this might be more an ecstatic way of thinking. Pleasure is a way of thinking. I've been kind of going back to Liddell McWhorter's book, Bodies and Pleasures, lately in conversation, because McWhorter is quoting Foucault, talking about bodies and pleasures being the potential site for us to have like real transformation, namely in expanding our capacity for experiencing pleasure in our bodies. But when it comes to learning how to break norms or resist fascist laws and policies and just a culture overall, or to divert to just be a little bit in defiance of the status quo, that dissonance can feel really bad for people if we don't have the capacity and the like a real embodied constitution to be able to move through that, not even just without feeling or like tolerating with a capacity for the discomfort, but if we can move through that kind of dissonance with the norms of the status quo on a principled matter, not just for the sake of like pushing back and rule breaking. There's always a reason to do it. So the dissonance of breaking from the norm can actually be something that is a good feeling, like maybe one of pride or one of power or one of pleasure, and one of community or one of celebration or one of creative expression or one of like all these other things. So getting into our bodies in a way that feels like this is us getting free in terms of our like affective constitutions is part of the process of getting free. So then, in the process of doing this kind of like arc of my best first ideas for getting free, then we started talking about the abyss. And so I want to jump into this too, because when I talk about the abyss, let's just say, first impressions, what do we get when we think about the abyss? I think we think about this, like, I tried to illustrate it, like a dark void. There's this like amorphous, undefined, who knows what it holds, what it can do, like depth of uncertainty, a field of unknowing. And the abyss is generally like characterized with this a blanket of darkness, where there's no light. So it's kind of like this black hole of a void, the abyss. that caricature of what the abyss is, I think for sure in many people conjures up like eerie feelings of discomfort because it is so unknown and undefined. It's like walking into a dark room and you don't know if there are knives, spikes coming up from the floor, or if everything's okay. You just don't know. So it's like very anxiety provoking because we can't tell what is present, and therefore we can't determine what's safe or even like orient ourselves in the abyss. So yes, of course that can feel frightening, it can feel scary, and I think that's why a lot of people don't face it. But in terms of the way that I wrote about the abyss and the way I talk about it, and in For Love of Strangers, it was about flirting with the abyss, which is how I titled this update too. Flirting with the abyss, I think, becomes an option, one, primarily when we have the conditions built up around us to be able to do it. So that might, in some ways, if we're talking really materially about like facing the abyss, that might be like choosing to go into the unknown might be easier to do when you have the assurance of having material comfort, like privilege of access to resources, money, housing, your basic needs are covered. Yes, for sure that makes it so much easier. I'm not saying I'm not saying anything otherwise. Like that's the only reason why I feel like I've been able to do what I've been able to do for the past 5 years in the depth and extent of my own growth and learning. It's because I have the conditions that have allowed for this to be the case. Now, let's just pause and say like there are great reasons to criticize a culture that does not provide for its people to have the sort of conditions that would be conducive for this level of experimentation or creative exploration or attempting as a way to keep people fearful, feeling timid and docile. And the docile language there is like a direct correlation to Foucault's language. Like if the systems or the conditions around us keep us so small and docile, then we will not rebel. So there's like a power dynamic built into all of that. Anyway, all that to say, yeah, we have to have certain conditions. I think, let me lighten that up. It's incredibly helpful to have certain kinds of conditions that enable us to be more supported in the process of flirting with the abyss, for sure. Everybody's threshold on that is going to be different. I know some people be like, I got $5,000 in the bank and I'm going to run for it. And some people like, I would never be able to feel comfortable doing something so big and uncertain unless I had $5 million or something. I don't know. Everybody's constitution is different, but that's why I think the kind of consistent ideas, like if we personally can expand our capacity for approaching the abyss, then at least we're getting closer to having the opportunity to maybe like flirt with it a little bit and see what would happen. So in our conversation on romancing the revolution this past Sunday, I loved this. One person was like just kind of casually talking about, yeah, maybe like once you get there, then you can like, step into the abyss and then like explore around a little bit. And I just had to like grin because the idea of exploring around in the abyss was so fun. It shifts the dynamic so much from it being this like all consuming, overwhelming, like entity that might swallow you up to actually being just like a place to be and see what happens. And I love that because I do think that like flirting with the abyss is not just, in a way, it's like getting to know the abyss. One could think about it as like a place of emergence, even because it is so unknown. So I often refer to emergent strategy because if we really take seriously the value of emergence, then emergent, it's literally emergent. It doesn't exist. It emerges through the conditions that are set. So maybe the abyss is like this incredibly fruitful, generative place for something to emerge, and we can't know what it has unless and until we approach it. And maybe what is presented through an encounter with the abyss actually often depends on the constitution and the conditions we ourselves bring into it. So that's the other piece that I wanted to name, because Flirting with the abyss might sound like a very privileged position to be in, and in many ways it is. But if we take it on the side of like understanding the constitution and the conditions within ourselves, like that kind of nervous system, embodied capacity that we have to encounter something that will challenge us, that invites utter transformation, or that is completely unknown and uncertain in that very open ended kind of way. If we ourselves have that constitution, then I think that the way that we engage with it can be something from being swallowed up and overwhelmed by all this unknown and then fearful and afraid because of it, to actually being able to kind of like step into it with intention, with purpose, maybe even playfully, maybe even a little bit flirty, and then explore a little bit in there. If that sounds like just a metaphor, let me connect this to the other phrasing that came up when I was talking about this on Friday for the Love of Strangers. Because I titled this segment of the experience Flirting with the Abyss, or the Leap into Faith. Now, I'm not really like a very good scholarly philosopher. It's a point for another time. I do spend a lot of time on a few pieces that are kind of like the blood, the bones, the guts, the soul of my work. So I don't read widely in a lot of other places. So I've never really read Kierkegaard. That's my point here. I've never really read Kierkegaard, though I probably should, and I would probably like a lot of his work. I have some books laying around that I've, prompted myself to just be available to for the past couple of years, but I haven't actually read it. But I did read something, I think, vaguely. I have a sense that there was some commentary, I can't remember where I found it, when like someone was saying that we're very familiar with the phrase of the leap into faith. It's a leap of faith. Sorry, I got that backwards. Rewind. What we often hear is that something is a leap of faith. You have to take a leap of faith into the unknown. And I talk about faith all the time now too. Like faith is right up there with one of my like core tenets of my philosophy. And I move with a lot of faith, but it's not necessarily like a religious faith in the sense of believing in a higher power God entity. I'm not a theist in that way. But I can understand now more how religious folks who do believe in a theistic God function on a faith basis. I would love to spend time just talking about faith one time, because there's like so much to unpack here. Anyway, I move with a lot of faith, and the notion of a leap of faith, so common in our ways of just speaking. Even the way that I hear a leap of faith is kind of like the faith is the igniter to get you to jump into the abyss. So like I have faith, so I'm going to go. In a way that makes it sound like it's kind of like if you're not a faithful person, like kind of a silly, if not bad, maybe even dumb choice to jump. If you are not a person of faith, a leap of faith sounds ridiculous. You know what I mean? So the leap of faith, if you're not a person who believes with faith, a leap of faith could sound like then you really have no good reason one way or another to do this. It's kind of just like on a whim, you're hopeful for your sake, but there's really nothing else like informing this to give you the basis of that choice that you would make, other than like something in you just decided I'm gonna believe, and you do it. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, what I was reading one time, I heard that like Kierkegaard, actually, the phrasing of the leap of faith was not a leap of faith, but a more like true translation of the idea was a leap into faith. And that caught my attention. So now imagine that we're flirting with the abyss, and we're like, yeah, I wonder what you might hold. And I know that if I were to go into this, step into this field of uncertainty, I literally don't know what could happen. It could be bad. It could swallow me up. Let me just like refer back to this page again because it's here. So, am I going to read the whole thing? Maybe not. I'll just skim it. I'm sorry, I don't want to read the whole bit. But the field of uncertainty, the abyss is kind of like this field of uncertainty that can and maybe even likely will absorb you. One gets the uncanny sense it may destroy you. I think that's when people are afraid of it. But it's not really about the abyss as much as it is your relationship to it. So this is what I wrote on this page. So there is definitely a matter of choice. It's a practice of willing to go into the abyss. And Nietzsche used the imagery of tightrope walking across a field of dangers, risking one's own downfall in the pursuit of self-overcoming. That sounds dark and heavy and scary, Nietzsche. Why would you do that? But I think this aligns with like a typical way of thinking about the abyss. I wrote, what does this look like? How do I know if I'm doing it right here in this section? I guess I am just going to read this. For me, I wrote, release fear and control, lose walls and inhibitions, question boundaries that protect illusions of safety, embrace potential possibility, which means uncertainty. Have faith in the moment, experience what is, grasp for liminal experiences where truth glimmers. Don't hold back or shy away, be fully present, receptive, eyes and heart and mind wide open. All of that to me is actually echoing a lot of like being open and present enough for the possibility for emergence. Now, what will happen though if we go into it? I wrote, some want to flirt with it and a handful want to traverse it, to know ourselves by what doing so exposes and reveals. The whole point of flirting with the abyss and possibly even traversing, entering, or walking across the abyss is not to necessarily figure out what does the abyss hold, like it's some uncharted territory that we haven't discovered yet, but instead, I think, to know ourselves by what doing so, the traversing, actually exposes and reveals. So who are we if we choose to go all in? Who will we become when we decide to take the deep dive? You have to let go with conviction and exercise your agency and your own responsibility. I guess I am doing the whole page. So I wrote here on this one, like this little cascade. This is scary. This is dangerous. This is foolhardy. This is madness. This is bravery. This is courageous. This is necessary. We might even say this is vulnerable. So for me, I wrote, the abyss is not a darkness or nothingness. It's very familiar. I know because I've spent many years growing up with it right beside me, always there in a special corner of my mind. I know it to be powerfully creative, even playful in ways, taunting me at times like a provocative imaginary friend. It knows me and I know it. But this part's key. But it may not make sense, and maybe you won't recognize me if I make it across or go down or sink under or fall in. I don't know who I'll be if I cross the abyss, and you might not know if I fell in and got swallowed up by it, or if I made it through and across and we're just happily living there any longer. We don't know. But so this is why I'm talking about the leap into faith and why that phrasing is so different. I don't think that it's a matter of a leap of faith to just go in. To me, approaching the unknown, doing the willful, purposeful action that lends you into a field of uncertainty to see what happens, to see who you are, who you become. That is not a matter of like, I'm doing this based on faith. That is a matter of doing it based on choice, agency, responsibility, intention for the pure project of self-overcoming. I do, however, trust myself in my experience of this as a leap into faith. Now, let me stop milking this and finally just tell you what I mean. By the leap into faith, for me, just as I was saying that like to approach something with uncertainty, maybe that feels vulnerable, that we don't know how it'll work out, or we're attempting something new, we can do our own work to establish a stronger constitution, embodied way, like our nervous system, our processing and emotional like regulation, even the way that we like make meaning of something. There are so many tools and practices to develop the fortitude and the strength of ourselves to be able to handle uncertainty or the unknown and what can unfold. And again, it could be good, it could be scary, but there's nothing that says it has to be negative. At the same time that we can build up our internal constitutions to give ourselves a stronger basis to flirt with the abyss. The leap into faith for me comes from a simultaneous and almost like parallel strengthening with a constitution of, for me, it's faith and wisdom. I said faith in wisdom. Now, the leap into faith is kind of like into this pool for me of the faith that I have in the truth of the wisdom that I have learned and hold. Let me say this in another way. I wouldn't just foolhardily jump into a precarious position and like just hurl myself into precarity without a lot of reason to do it. That's just not who I am. Like I need to have some like sense of grounding, I guess, which maybe sounds like contradictory in terms of this abyss. But the grounding that I have when I say wisdom, the way that I talk about wisdom is truth with lineage. And so I am using language of truth. I believe in like there's truth here. And if I move with a closeness to truth, it's not a truth that I just am like capital T truth. This is what I believe is true. This is something that I am holding and carrying because people have held it and carried it before me and then passed it on. And I am just learning in this lineage of people who have had access to it, basically, and studied it, been in relationship with it. So thank goodness I have philosophy. I will always say that because it has given me such a strong foundation to believe in the truth of the wisdom. And philosophy, after all, some would translate as like the love of wisdom. So carrying this kind of wisdom, which I'm not just talking like Plato and Socrates and all like the canonical dead white guys of Western traditional philosophy. I'm meaning the people who I actually learn from, who are what I said, the bones, the butts, the butts, the bones, the guts, the blood and the soul, the heart, like the real body of my thinking. Butts are included in that too, but those people, that's, Audre Lorde forever, is a huge person. Gloria Anzaldúa, Bell Hooks, these are women. And then there are the key figures like Nietzsche, Charles Mills, and the other philosophers who like truly shape my whole way of knowing and my whole way of living. To be in that philosophical practice day by day by day, every night, especially reinforced and expanded because of the choices that I made in the past 6 years, the process that I'm always, always in, I know that most people do not live like me. I know that. So I'm not saying that this is really anybody can do this, or I'm not saying everybody should. But for me, my experience is like I feel deeply supported at this point with a lot of faith in the wisdom, the truth of the lineage that I have been studying and hopefully become part of, that the leap into faith captures that for me. It's not, I don't know, how can I describe this difference? The leap into faith in that way is actually, it feels so like nourishing. It feels like this dive into like this luxurious like jelly gold pool or something. Like the leap into faith is something that is so buoyant and all surrounding and like so rich and like saturated, that the leap into faith and that is the opposite of this airy thin just on a whim like I'm gonna believe in it or something. Like I don't know, maybe this is me coming into like my own religious awakening or something. But I've talked about faith for the past, like, almost 10 or more years now, but especially since 2020, in the past 6, my notion of faith is so much stronger. Like, I actually feel like I'm an extremely faithful person, and that is why and how I've made so many choices and decisions that I have over the past 6 years that do look a lot like maybe being vulnerable, and honestly could be characterized as like stepping into the abyss, if not flirting with the abyss. Like maybe it is just flirting for a lot of it, but getting in there and exploring a little bit. But the richness of having so much faith, to leap into faith, is almost like the abyss is not scary when you have that personal constitution built up for being able to address or like move through not knowing, some uncertainty, but there's this openness to it that doesn't assume it's obviously naturally and only going to be bad or scary. And then there's also the abyss of the faith. I wonder if, I don't know how like this leap into faith and flirting with the abyss are the same or different. Like what if they're the same? What if the abyss is just the shadow of faith? That was deep. What if the abyss is just the shadow side of faith, you know? What if? I don't know. Anyway, I felt like that was worth talking about because I would hate for anybody to think that like when I'm talking about flirting with the abyss, it's like, oh, that requires so much privilege, or it's just coming from this place of like recklessness. It's honestly feels exactly the opposite for me. It doesn't feel reckless. Of course, it feels a little like a little shaky because no one else really knows what's going on here, or like it does kind of feel like a big step into who knows what, and that makes other people uncomfortable around you when you do that. But it's not like going on a bender, for like a week. That's not the abyss I'm talking about. It's not this sort of haphazardly ultra foolhardy brash kind of movement in your life. It's so the opposite, but honestly worthwhile, because I think this is the space and the place for like deep transformation, self-overcoming, yes, but more than just a self-overcoming project. Like I want us to be able to do this kind of movement for, changing the world for better. So now that I've talked about flirting with the abyss and the leap into faith, I'm at a place right now where I think we're over an hour, so I might kind of hold off at this particular moment, which is probably good to have a little restraint. But my current abyss and the current vulnerable space that I'm in right now, thanks to the past 4 weeks of this work that I've been doing, which I again can personally feel differently in my own body. Like a friend texted me when I was live streaming on 420 and I was like, can't talk, stoned live streaming right now. And she was like, and how do we feel about that? And I said, I feel good. And that was so the truth. Like I just felt good in it, even though that was a space that like I've never allowed myself to do before for all sorts of reasons. And probably because like it's been vulnerable and scary and bad previously. Like I didn't want to risk that. So I've always had that hard boundary of like, do not ever show this part of your process. But when I did that on Monday night, I actually felt really good in it. And that's the juxtaposition, contrast of wanting to be able to show up and feel comfortable, at ease, and free in the way of, how you move through an experience. Like I wanted to do with the gadfly last month, but it did not work out that way. I got feedback from a friend on Friday when I was doing For the Love of Strangers on Getting Free. They texted me afterwards like, you seemed really comfortable and very like fluid and loose in that, which is appropriate since the theme was on getting free. And the truth was I did feel that way. And so then on Monday night, live streaming in a totally different, new, very, very, very raw, extremely raw and vulnerable space, I felt good in that. And now I wanted to come into this live and be able to continue carrying that energy. Like I feel really good being able to share this kind of stuff. And again, I think that what I'm learning is that this is because I have for sure been doing my own internal work in an expedited fashion in the past few weeks internally, but trust and know that like I also have a lot of reason to believe in myself and my work and what I'm doing, which I hope we could all move with that level of confidence. But I also understand the work that it has taken to be able to reinforce that level of, I'm not going to say assurance or being, it's certainly not certain, but like the confidence is a good word, to have a reason to really believe in it, and therefore even more I don't know, weight or motivation to lean into those choices, to pursue those projects. So that's where I'm at right now. So what I was going to say is that currently my abyss I've now labeled this language. My abyss at this point in time in my life is for sure around truly leaning as far as I can into the nature and work of being a meta-philosophical performance artist. Always hard since no one knows what that means, and even if I have to start again by describing what meta is and the point of it, fine, whatever. But I also began believing it so much because there's really no way to fail. It's not like I'm afraid of failure or like I think failure is bad. I fail all the time and failure can be very fine. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing at all. But in this sort of makeup, the way that I've set this up, it's really not an option to not do the thing that I'm talking about. So that's what I mean. There's like a safeguard against failing. If I'm doing the thing that I'm talking about, then everything's just being in it in the process. Like it's already happening. So that is part of what gives me so much confidence. And with that, all like the whole schema just sort of finding its new placement and situatedness. It's like a Tetris wall clicking together. In just the past couple of days, then what that means now is that moving forward, I am going to do some things. I'm going to keep playing with my formatting for the gadfly, the stand-up philosophy. I don't have For the Love of Strangers as much, but I am tweaking that already. And last Friday's experience of that was a good validation of the tweak. So I'm going to continue playing with the space and the gadfly to see how that fits differently, which is the reason why I'm not giving up on it, because I think it's like there's something here and it's really worth, being in the abyss and exploring a little bit. That's what it feels like. This is the abyss. The gadfly is also the abyss. But beyond that, I've given myself basically a 6-month timeline to try to do the biggest project that I've ever tried to do, and I'm still figuring out what that will look like in terms of how to structure it and format it and pursue it. But I think that what has shifted in the past days and weeks is at least my orientation to saying this is the thing I have to do. This is, as the second troll, distant cousin, far removed, provoked me to say, yeah, I have things to say when there are some things that I feel like I have to say. So that's what's going to happen now. I think that it might also end up influencing what happens in Romancing the Revolution. That might be a couple months delayed of where that shift really starts to happen, but we're wrapping up April. This Sunday is the last Sunday, so May will be the next new month of Romancing the Revolution. And I think we might start to feel a shift in how that space goes and the functioning of the pages and the conversations. But I love it. I really appreciate that space. If you want to be part of it, join. And then, yeah, I think, I don't know, looking down and out to the open field of possibilities with a lot of, at this point, it feels pretty grounded and centered. That I just like, I want to do this project and I'm excited for it. Heads up, if you're in Fort Collins, mark your calendars for my birthday. Because every birthday for the past 5 years has been an event. And this one is going to be, if all goes well and according to my, nascent plans at this moment, this one's going to be a big one too. So get your June calendars held for my birthday. All right. So hopefully maybe I'll share more on what happens after that, but I just wanted to at least use this as an opportunity to mark and document the process. Again, kind of to share what's been happening behind the scenes, even if maybe just because you maybe have noticed that I'm showing up a little bit differently. I've noticed I'm showing up a little bit differently, and that, friends, is the story about why. It has a lot to do with vulnerability, and it has a lot to do with changing the relationship to uncertainty, a lot about building up a personal constitution, and a lot about like moving with so much faith in the wisdom and the truth of what is available to us, and then always the decision to act on it. So that's me right now, looking at myself in the mirror and being like, if you really want to do this, then you've got to do it. And so the choice and the action and the decision is really the defining moment. So let's stay tuned to see what happens in the next 6 months, since I've given myself that timeline. That's what I have to share. Thanks for being along on the journey. And hopefully, I don't know, hopefully you're finding your own way through the abyss with a lot of support and maybe even a little flirting and a lot of faith. That grounded, informed, really nourished, luxurious pool of faith to surround and hold you in the midst of all of this. Okay. Wish me luck for the gadfly on Sunday, and there will be more soon. Hopefully see you next Wednesday. Thanks for joining, everyone. Bye.